My name is Upendanice Barasa. I moved to Japan to teach English from Kenya. If you're interested, subscribe. You don't want to miss it. Come on, join the bandwagon. Hey guys, welcome to this week's video. I'm so excited to be back. I have seen great reception with the last video that we did, and I think now we need now to start to get acquainted with each other. So last week we talked about the requirements that you need to teach English in Japan, but we have a few disclaimers. So this week's video is things to consider before applying for this job. I'm pretty sure you've seen the title, so let's just get into it. Number one thing to consider is redundancy. When I first heard about this thing, when I was just preparing to move, I was like, I've been a teacher in Kenya for 3 years. I would teach complex things, your grammar, dissecting books, literature, poetry. And I really enjoyed that. And I was like, if I'm teaching English in Japan, I'm just going to be teaching the most basic of things like cat, pen, book, ABC. And I thought it would be very easy given my background. But you get tired. It's very redundant. And sometimes, let's say you have third grade and that school has like 5 third grade classes and they're all learning about the same thing. So imagine a whole day of teaching the same exact lesson and singing the same things. I like cat. What animal do you like? I like cat. I like cat. I like blue. For 6 lessons. Sometimes I just get tired because I've said these things from morning. It's now afternoon and I'm still singing the same song and teaching the same things. It gets to your head sometimes. It's tiring. You're just doing the same thing. And maybe this is just one school. Tomorrow you're going to a different school and they're learning the same thing. And you have to sing I like cat from yesterday. It got to a point whereby sometimes I get home, I can't even speak properly. I'm like, oh, what color do you like? I like cat. How are you? Hello, how are you? It's like programming in a way. So redundancy is something you have to consider. Number 2, costs involved. So how much money you will need to relocate. It's a lot of money, and a video is coming on that, how much money you will need to to have in your bank account. This is not an immigration requirement, but this is not like China or Dubai or this markets that are well established when it comes to ESL teaching, that they will cover your travel costs. You have to pay for your own flight. You need to have money to sustain you and pay for your apartment when you move in. So you need a lot of money, and many companies would ask you to have at least 500,000 yen at hand. This is minus your flight. 500,000 yen is an equivalent of 500,000 Kenya shillings, thereabout, which is 5,000 US dollars, I think. Yeah, you will need that much, but when the video comes out for money, we shall talk about it at length. Next, not requirement. Next thing to consider is a low salary. Remember in my first video, I mentioned that you have a 90% chance of getting a job in Japan. And that's because the turnover rate is very high, which means people come in and go every year in, year out. People are always coming in and going out, which means that there are very many open positions. When you come from a first world country, let's say you're American or you're from the UK, you might find the salary in Japan to be very little compared to maybe the average salary back home. If you're coming from a third world country, the salary would be somehow okay, but still low, if that makes sense. It's very low. And when you move, people back home should not expect you to start building a home for them, should not be expecting you to take up people's school fees or pay for people's expenses, because that money is not there. It's not there. I like to think of Japan as a country for single people who are looking to explore and don't have responsibilities or are not paying for somebody's school fees or building somebody a home. That's how I would describe it best. But it's not bad if you know you've not been earning anything from Africa or from Asia, whatever country. It's not that bad, but it's bad. Yeah. Next is the working culture. If you guys do not know that Japan has the worst working, culture or dynamics in the world, long working hours, sitting durations, and the hierarchies and everything. So you're gonna get tired so much. The working culture here is not as relaxed as back home. In fact, I spent so much time in Kenya as a teacher, always scrolling on my phone and just relaxing and being in class as well, but being on my phone. You can miss a lesson and just give students work sometimes when you're not in the mood to teach. I'm very guilty of that. Or sometimes just teach like for the first 20 minutes and then give students assignment and then you'll just be relaxing. But in Japan, it's like you can't miss a lesson. You can't be on your phone. You have to pretend like you're doing something sometimes, even though you're not. You just have to desk-warm and act busy. I think that's the best way to describe it. Next thing to consider is the currency strength. As much as the salary is low, the Japanese yen has been getting weaker and weaker and weaker in comparison to the Kenyan shilling, because I'm from Kenya. That's the only way I can compare the currency. Back in the day, the Japanese yen and the Kenyan shilling were at par, which means 1 yen was equal to 1 Kenyan shilling. And then it got to a point where now the Kenyan shilling is stronger than the Japanese yen, and it keeps fluctuating every day. I think at the moment the current exchange is 1 yen equals to 0.86 Kenyan shilling cents, which means if you're a Kenyan and you're sending money home, you're always going at a loss. If you're from the US and you're sending money to your account or back home, you're going to a loss. But when you're moving from the US to Japan with your dollars, or moving from Kenya to Japan with your shilling, I mean, it has some value, but when you start earning in yen, the currency is not that strong. But for some countries, I know the yen is stronger than their shilling, their currency. So maybe that wouldn't be a huge issue. Next thing to consider is no career progression. Now, I would say this majorly applies to people who did not do education or are not teachers by profession. If you did maybe IT or you're a doctor and you come to Japan, you cannot teach for the rest of your life because, like I said, there's a high turnover rate and there's no room for progression. There's no room for you to say, okay, I've been a teacher for 4 years, now I have to be a deputy principal or a principal or a head of department or something. There's no room for that because, one, you're not Japanese, you don't speak Japanese, and the systems do not allow for that to happen. So if you're a lawyer, you cannot teach English in Japan forever. At some point, you'll have to go back home or go somewhere and practice what you studied, But I would say for a teacher, at least for me, in the Kenyan context, I would say even just moving here and teaching English is career progression for me to some extent. And however, if I ever decide to move back home and teach, I will not be in the same place as a teacher who has just taught in Kenya predominantly, but maybe I would have better opportunities at international schools, at universities maybe. And if I want to progress in my teaching career, it's easy for me to get opportunities now in Dubai, in Hong Kong. Those are places I've always wanted to go. And before, I didn't have, you know, a very good CV to stand out. But now I think it puts me at a better position. So if you're a teacher, I would say it's something good to experience, especially when you have a similar background to mine. Maybe if you're from the US, you're a teacher from a first world country, maybe this doesn't count as much. But if you're from a country where there's very little to no employment, I think it's very important. But at the same time, there's no career progression in a way that you can't move to higher ranks, if that makes sense. Next thing to consider is cost of living. Depending on where you're coming from, you would see this differently. But I would say if you're coming from the US or from a first world country, I will reference the US a lot because they come to Japan a lot. And Japan is obsessed with America because of the dollar and the economy. The cost of living in Japan would be a lot cheaper for you. But if you're coming from a third world country, it could be a tad bit expensive. But from where I'm sitting, I think Japan is quite affordable. I think. But this might not be the reality for everyone. But I would say Japan is a great place to live. You know, quality of life is good. Cost of living, for me, it's just moderate. I think the salaries could be better. So if the salaries were better, then I would say it's cheaper, but I would say it's not bad. It's not like crazy when I see, you know, Kenyans moving to America and the amount of money that they spend. If I'm looking, you know, that direction, I would say Japan is better. But still, even as a Kenyan coming from Kenya, I could be talking from a point of privilege. I don't think Japan is that expensive, at least for me, but it is expensive. For me, I should emphasize that. Demanding, second last. The job is very demanding, which means you always have to put a positive front, smiling, and trying your best to integrate into a new culture with your colleagues, with the students. Because trust me, Japan as a society is a bit complex. Not everything is black and white. Some things are gray, some things are orange. And you have to read the room a lot. So sometimes it could be mentally draining because you have to do this almost every day and you never know whether you're stepping on a live wire, you know? You could be doing something very innocently, but you've actually wronged so many people without knowing. And lastly is lifestyle. I saved this one for last. Dating and social life. There's no social life in this country, literally. Japanese people keep to themselves, and rightfully so. They're the most homogenous society in the world. And everyone is just a minimalist and an introvert. Japan as a country is an introvert's heaven. Japanese people are not very open to, you know, make friends with foreigners or establish deep connections with foreigners. And I even know people who have lived here their entire lives don't even have a Japanese friend. They don't have a Japanese friend they can actually call a friend. And dating as well, because people are always coming in and going out. Like I said, homogenous. Japanese people rarely marry people from other races, or they have just begun, but it's not as easy because, again, many of them don't speak English, which means you have to speak Japanese. Dating, social life, nada. So if you're coming here expecting to find the love of your life, it could be a tad bit stressful. If you're coming here thinking you're gonna make great connections with Japanese people, it could be a tad bit stressful. But even with foreigners, because they're always coming in and going out, you could have a good friend, the next year they're gone. So yeah, those are things to consider. So far so good. If you think these are not things that would bother you, you can go ahead and apply for the job. If you think you need to reconsider your decisions, the time is now. See you again next week. Bye.